lot of material yet we have to cover both on Monday and Tuesday, so I would suggest this weekend kind of looking at some of that material and getting some of that under control. So yeah, the exam's coming very quickly, and then you don't have much time between the last lab next Tuesday and the exam. So it's coming really quick. Okay, any questions over what we've been covering so far? Last lab, we had these particular clinical themes. Ulcer, the whole idea of the peritoneal cavity, there's a space that we have, and we do have then two pockets, a big one and a small one, so greater and lesser peritoneal cavities, kind of spaces. That lesser one, that lesser peritoneal sac, is also called the omental bursa, and they're connected. They were all part of this one cavity, and as a result of this rotation during development and then placement of the abdominal visceral structures into this small space, we end up with structures becoming kind of in this so-called secondarily retroperitoneal position, and we end up with a pocket created off the main cavity, but they're still connected by way of that epiploid foramen. So that was kind of the theme here. If you have an ulcer and you've got to surgically try to prevent maybe excessive acid accumulation in the stomach area, which would irritate this particular lesion on the lining of the stomach, what nerve might you cut, which would help? Which one's involved mostly in the autonomics, sympathetic, parasympathetic? Which one is actually involved in secretions, actually promoting digestion?
Oh, vagus.
Right, so we would do a vagotomy, some type of vagotomy. It could be partial, but it might cut just, you have anterior and posterior gastric nerves, continuation of the anterior and posterior vagal trunks into that area, and they might just cut maybe the anterior gastric, depends where that ulcer might be located. Okay, anyway, ascites, accumulation of fluid, excess fluid in that peritoneal cavity, conditions that might cause that, we went over those, right?
Liver cirrhosis.
Cirrhosis, right. Any kind of liver disease, potentially, pancreatitis, some cancer, so on. Pneumoperitoneum, the air in that cavity, could be caused by radiation in some way, maybe surgically, trauma. You might have an ulcer that opens up actually and allows air to get into that peritoneal cavity. Hysteral salpingography, so this would be a type of radiology, right? Introduce a radioactive substance in the female reproductive tract to see if we have patency in the fallopian tubes, right? And so leakage into the peritoneal cavity from that uterus and the fallopian tube area is okay. It depends how it gets out. Obviously, you want it to come out the fimbriated ends of the fallopian tube. Okay, so those are clear. Let's go to today's. Okay, here we have. Heavy drinker presents with bloody vomit, hemorrhoids, and a caput medusa. So he is later found to have splenomegalia, so enlargement of the spleen, ascites. Given the history of drinking, how do you explain these various conditions? So, in other words, the vomiting of blood, the hemorrhoids, and a caput medusa. How would we explain that?
The cirrhosis caused backup of the hepatic portal.
Well, we've got engorgement of blood, right? We've got this increased volume of blood into the normal drainage of the GI tract, the portal system, right? So we have portal venous hypertension. No valves, so blood's going to flow in the, actually in the direction of least resistance. So we start relying upon connections that we would have between our portal system and our cable system. So we've talked a little bit about cable shunts, connections that we would have between superior and inferior vena cava. For instance, we had that superficial epigastric, which was draining that periumbilical plexus area around the umbilicus, and lateral thoracic. Those were connections between superior and inferior vena cava. But we also have connections that are important between the portal system and the cable system. So if we have to, we're not able to get all the blood through the portal system, well, then we have to get blood back to the heart by an alternate route. And one of those is going to be these connections. So let's take a look at some of the connections. So this was highlighting in that next slide some of the connections that we have between the portal and the cable system that are important. And they would end up clinically causing then potentially some of these symptoms that this individual had, right? So, for instance, we got esophageal veins. Well, we got some of those veins that are draining up into our azygous system, right? Which drains into superior vena cava. That's a cable connection, right? We also have esophageal veins that are draining the abdominal portion of the esophagus that are heading into the portal system. So we have a portal cable anastomosis. So an engorgement of blood at the connections we have here, where we might have then varicosities forming, could break, burst in that esophageal area. These esophageal varices then become very thin-walled, ends up with blood getting into the GI tract, right? That individual vomiting blood. So we have then evidence that this potential portal venous hypertension is causing problems right in that esophageal area. We have actually connections around the umbilical area, both in that telosubcutaneous, the periumbilical space there where we had that plexus, and also deep, just behind the rectus abdominis, there's connections. So we actually have normally blood which is flowing from those areas, both in the telosubcutaneous and just around that umbilical area, heading back into the portal system. So one of the tributaries of the portal vein are these para-umbilical veins that run with that ligamentum teres of Haddo's. Right? So very small veins normally, and they're just a tributary of the portal system, so they're draining back down, towards that portal system. But they're connecting, anastomosing at the capillary level in that umbilical area with veins that are connecting to the cable system. Right? So we do have that superficial epigastric, here's the inferior epigastric, which anastomoses the superior epigastric, that's on a deeper plane. But superficial epigastric as well as lateral thoracic are cable drainage veins, right? That are draining into the cable system, but they're connecting. They're also connecting to the portal system. So if we have an engorgement of blood in this portal system, we get reverse flow of blood in this paraumbilical vein, taking blood then to these vessels where it's anastomosing. So those in the telosubcutaneous, we're going to have an engorgement of blood around the periumbilical plexus area, around the umbilicus. So we get that caput medusum. So that's this caput medusum. And then hemorrhoids, you can see down here, superior rectal vein. You saw the superior rectal artery and vein today. Superior rectal vein is a tributary of the inferior mesenteric vein, which drains into the cables, into the portal system. So that's our part of our GI tract drainage heading toward the liver. But it anastomoses with the middle and the inferior rectal veins, which drain into the cable system. So hemorrhoids would be an engorgement of blood and evidence potentially that the individual may have problems in that portal system. It doesn't have to be, hemorrhoids don't have to be a sign of portal venous hypertension, but they could be. And then what's silent, which you wouldn't be able to see, are also connections that we have with those structures that were intraperitoneal during development that are now in a retroperitoneal position. So parts of the GI tract that are secondarily retroperitoneal, they end up contacting the body wall, right? They're pushed to the posterior abdominal wall. They're covered over by peritoneum now in the anterior lateral aspects, but not on the backside. So they're contacting vessels of the body wall. Their drainage is heading to the portal system, part of the GI tract, but they're also anastomosing then with these vessels feeding from the abdominal wall area. So we do have potential sites for anastomosis with all these parts of the GI tract that are contacting the body wall. So ascending, descending colon, pancreas, duodenum, liver has a bare area that contacts the diaphragm. So those are all sites where we could potentially have anastomosis between the portal and the system. Okay, makes sense? Then let's see what else we got here. Cholecystolithiasis. So that's gallstones, right? The presence of gallstones in the gallbladder. You might also see this cholelithiasis, same thing. You might see choleductolithiasis. That's the presence of gallstones in the biliary tract. So this just means we have gallstones. Now if you get an inflamed gallbladder, that's what's that called? Cholecystitis, right? Okay. So looking at the biliary tract now, it could present problems if you have gallstones that actually form a blockage along that biliary tract. And lastly, hiatal hernias. We talked a little bit about that, or you had a slide here. Take a look at that. Yeah, just a couple different types of hiatal hernias. So you've got these large structures that are essentially going through the diaphragm at different locations, right? Inferior vena cava is going through an inferior vena cava foramen right through the central tendon area. You've actually got an esophageal hiatus, and then you've got the abdominal aorta, the aortic hiatus. got a dome-shaped diaphragm, right? The more anterior you are, the higher up vertebral level-wise that opening's going to be, right? And the nice way to remember it is 8, 10, 12. So inferior vena cava is approximately T8 vertebral level. Then a little further posteriorly is going to be the esophagus at T10 vertebral level going through. And then finally, aortic hiatus is going to be at about T12, so 8, 10, 12. So we've got two different types of hernias for the parts of the GI tract here. The stomach can herniate up into the thoracic cavity. So sliding, type 1, where you actually have the cardioesophageal hiatus actually herniates up in, upwards, whereas it stays in place in the periesophageal, where you get the funding part of the stomach actually herniating up in the thoracic.
What problems can these cause?
Well, you can see that you could have problems with digestion a little bit, food getting down into this area, so the person could end up with, severe heartburn, reflux, kind of a GERD situation. Food could be retained in that esophagus for long periods of time. Okay. Two terms. What's a plural tap called?
Paracentesis.
Thoracentesis, right?
Thoracentesis.
What about a peritoneal tap? Paracentesis. So for ascites, you have paracentesis. We've already talked about thoracentesis for the thorax. So just a couple of terms.